down in southern Minnesota, Fairmont, right about the middle of the state, and about 9 miles from the Iowa border. And right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, in the fall, that next January, I enlisted in the, first of all, in the Minnesota State Guard, and I was on active duty and on guard duty up at Duluth on the ore docks and railroad trestles and stuff. And I left there about November of that year of 42, and then right after the first of the year in 47, I volunteered for the Army and wanted to enlist in the Air Corps. And they said that there was a waiting list to get in the Air Corps, so if I just go out as a first draft call, and then when I got to a base, I should transfer to the Air Corps, which is what I did. And so it was in the early part of 1943 that I finally got in training in the Air Corps and started out down in Miami Beach, Florida. The Air Corps and the Navy had taken over most of the hotels there, so we pretty lived in much luxury for a while. And then I was sent up to Lynchburg, Virginia to go to college and got 2 years college credit in 6 months. And then I was sent to basic training in Montgomery, Alabama. And then my first airplane was a PT-17 in South Carolina.
Okay.
And then I got through primary training and got into basic training. And as I say, but for the grace of God, I wouldn't be sitting here tonight because I crashed a BT-13 one night in doing night landings in an auxiliary field. Instead of landing on a runway, I landed in the trees.
Oh no!
And something.
What was that like?
And I walked away from it. So, like I said, if it wasn't for the grace of God, I wouldn't be here. But.
So what's it like flying?
What's it like flying?
What's it like?
Well, it's
describe it for me.
Something else. I mean, you're naturally when you're soloing, you're all alone.
Right.
And when I got into the B-25, of course, we had a co-pilot and a crew, and it's different. I mean,
Did you like flying solo or more with the crew?
No, I enjoyed flying the B-25 more, I think, because for one thing, I mean, it was powerful and
I bet.
and big. I mean, compared to the basic trainer, and our class in 1945 was the first one in twin engine training to take the B-25. We up to that time they used a twin engine Cessna or something like that, but our class they started using the B-25, and so that's what I ended up flying.
So what kind of missions did you fly? Where
I was not overseas.
Oh, you were
I
not
never got overseas.
Okay. So how long were you in the service?
I was in until the war was over, and I got separated in 1946 in January. So I was actually in service 44 months, including that Minnesota State Guard thing. But
Okay. Well, I wanted one more question. You know, it's really, to be frank, there's not a lot of you left. You know what I mean? And you know, it was a different time back then. If you could, what should you and the fellow soldiers, what do you think you want to be remembered for?
Pardon me?
What do you think you want to be remembered for?
Well, I think that just like that picture, I mean, a bunch of people got in because there was saw a necessity of being in the service and doing what we had to do. As I mentioned 6 years ago, I kind of wonder if our generation today would have the same.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. You know, we haven't had the need for it as back when, where anyone and everyone was signing up.
And I have 3 sons, and 2 of them, my oldest son was in the Navy on an aircraft carrier, and my youngest son was in the Army, and my middle son had enlisted in the Navy and was all accepted except on his final exam for his health. They found eczema in his elbow and they rejected him, so he didn't get to go in. But
so kind of the whole family, right? Somewhat. They wanted to do what Dad did.
Yeah. And then, according like that picture, my grandfather had those 36 grandchildren.
Right, yeah.
Service all at the same time. And
that's a huge.
My youngest brother and one of my cousins were the only ones that were wounded. Everybody else came back, and one of my other cousins was a Navy pilot, and I don't think anybody else flew besides me, but and him. I mean.
Right. And I know we kind of touched on it before, but if you could maybe just a little bit more about. Do you remember the first flight you had?
Actually, I flew. Went with one of my cousins to a county fair one place, and there was a guy giving airplane rides, and I wasn't very old then. I was probably about 15 or 16, and I decided I wanted to take a ride. So I took a ride in the airplane, and that kind of, I guess that kind of grew on me from then on.
Sure, definitely.
And whenever we would, I haven't gone any place lately, but whenever we went anywhere in commercial airlines, why, my wife would say, well, I'm not worried because I got a pilot side of me in case something would happen.
Yeah, you could probably take it down. Yeah.
But I don't know what I would do with a jet, but I'd sure try.
I bet. Do you guys know any other questions you'd want to ask?
I understand they're fixing up that B-13 and BT-13 now?
Working on it.
That's what I crashed in, was a B-13.
You said it was at nighttime too, right?
What?
You said it was a night flight?
Yes. Yeah, we were doing practice landings at night on an auxiliary field where they had just bulldozed a runway out of a bunch of trees, and for light we had some kerosene, those highway flares for light, and it was a hazy night beside, and so I had made a landing, and then I took off and was going to go around, and we had a makeshift tower out there, and they got on the radio and they said, "You're up too high, put down more flaps and slow down or you're going to overrun the runway." But my problem was I wasn't on the runway, I was off to the side, and when I did what they told me to do, I landed in the trees instead.
Did you fly after the war at all, Roy?
No. Well, not intentionally. I mean, I worked for auto parts company, and the owner of our company lived in Esterville, Iowa, which is a ways away from Fairmont, and whenever he came to visit, he flew up, and then I would have to take and go pick him up at the airport. And several times when he came, he wanted me to fly with him, and then later in my life I was a manager for Alice Chalmers Manufacturing Company, and one of my dealers had a Mooney aircraft, and I flew that for a couple of times with him, but otherwise, no, I haven't. And then a few years ago, I was working with Gary Zerger crop dusting, and one of his friends stored an airplane in his hangar out there, and one day he called me and said, if you want to go for a ride, I'll take you. And after we got in the air, he said, you want to take over? And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I flew his little Sky Chief or whatever that was, and I flew that a couple times. I didn't land it or take it off, but I flew it.
Yeah. How was that feeling?
Well,
Being in the air again?
yeah, well, it's something like roller skating. You don't forget.
Right, yeah.
So you had in the Army, Roy. So in the service, you had a private license, or would that qualify as a private license?
What?
A private license in the when you were in the service, did you have a private license, or did they?
No, I never got a private license. What I had was a certificate from the Air Corps, which indicated that I was a twin-engine pilot and had night flying or instrument clearance. And after the war, if I had wanted to, all I'd have to do is show that credential to Northwest Airlines, and I could have been a pilot for them. But I never. By the time I got out of service, I was married and had a son, and I just kind of, I don't know. I mean, I regret many times that I didn't stay in or didn't continue flying, but I didn't, and here I am. So.
Right, yeah. Let's talk about where you grew up and what got you into the service.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa. That's the easternmost city in the state. And my dad was interested in aviation too, and so we went on our first ride when I was 7 years old. And it was in a Ford Trimotor. And we couldn't, there was no place to sit. You had to sit on some cushions and so on. But I never thought about flying in the military until World War II came along. And then I suddenly got interested in it and went for it.
Yeah.
Made it.
Yeah. So where were you stationed? I was doing some research last night. You were in the Pacific right away for World War II, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
First place I went was in South Dakota, at a college there, and that was our first route. And then the instructor we had was so poor, and he was fired, and so then they gave me another instructor, and he was good. And then you want me to trace back a little place? Let's see. We went from there to Jesus to the University of Minnesota. I'm trying to think of the name of the building. Anyway, and then from there we went to Iowa and went through pre-flight and did a lot of things that screwed up a couple of guys.
Yeah.
And then from there we went back to Minnesota, and we started flying the old biplanes, the two wingers. Yeah. And then from there we went to Pensacola, Florida.
So what were your missions in World War II?
Well, there was no question I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't give doodly darn about flying passengers or so on,
Right.
but I wanted to get in the fight, so anyway, that's what I requested, and I got it. My gunnery scores were quite high, and that was one of the factors. You had to be in the 10% racket, I think, and yeah, at Pensacola. We were at Waiting Field, I think, and we flew there for, and they organized us in groups, and we were 7 of us together. And then we went from there and we started flying fighters.
What was your first fighter? Do you remember?
Pardon?
Do you remember your first aircraft, your fighter aircraft?
Yeah, that was the first fighter aircraft. It was
Okay.
a terrible airplane. It was not good at all. And by comparison, some of we had later on, it was pretty good. And so then we went down and we were flying out of Florida, and we were going 100 miles out to sea before we do any live firing. And it worked out very well. And so we were there for the better part of a year. From there, we went to heaven. We got into Corsairs.
I was just going to ask, what's your relationship with the aircraft behind you?
Oh, I'll tell you, that is the most beautiful airplane, one of the best ones to fly that was ever devised by mankind. It is just a fabulous airplane.
Yeah.
And so I feel I was very lucky to get. But the first time I saw a Corsair it was either in the Des Moines Register or the Dubuque Herald. There's a picture of the new one.
Yeah.
And he said, this is the newest fighter that's coming out. And I just fell in love with it. And so then we went and we went from the East Coast to the West Coast, and that's where I got checked out on the Corsair, and I've been flying Corsairs ever since. So anyway.
So I was reading about a certain mission that you had last night. Is it true that you always carried binoculars with you in your cockpit?
Not always,
Yeah.
but if I know there's going to be certain things en route, I'll have the binoculars there. And boy, they paid off.
I was going to say, do you remember that certain mission where, I forgot the details, but
Oh, God.
where you found some, I think some Japanese bombers on the ground or something like that?
Yeah, we found a lot of, this was, when they came in with the sacrifice of the
kamikaze.
the divine, so they came in with that, and that's the thing we were worried about.
Right.
And we didn't really have good defense against it. We didn't know it. And this is something new. And so they put one division, maybe it was 2, I don't know, 1 or 2 divisions, each time to go after the kamikazes. That was your first goal. And it worked out okay. We got several of them. We missed a few too, and then later on, I even met a kamikaze pilot.
Really?
And we had a good time together. Awesome. He was now a medical doctor.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So he jumped from one to the other.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I'll tell you about that later.
Yeah. So what's the best part about flying an airplane? You said you did it early on in your life. Well, what kind of draws you to getting in the cockpit? What's the feeling like when you're up there?
Well, I'll tell you, I've always been a guy that likes to take chances. And when I first, I was on my bike, and then I got a motorcycle, and then I got all these things. And so I like that challenge that goes with it. And flying airplanes is a challenge. I loved it.
Awesome.
Loved it. Yeah.
So what, you don't hear of a lot of veterans flying in both World War II and Korea. So what was the transition like from World War II to
Big
Korea?
difference.
Big difference?
I'll tell you, in Korea, it was much worse. The weather was against us. The geography was against us, and of course, the North Koreans were were about the cruelest people that you'll ever find on the earth. So between the two, the World War II was easier than Korea.
So were you still flying Corsairs in
Yep.
Korea? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Flew Corsairs all the time. All my combat has been in Corsairs.
Yeah. Also, I saw you got the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Oh, they handed out all
Just
kinds
handed
of
them out
stuff
to
like that. Everybody, everybody stick around. You know, you get all kinds of junk coming on you.
Yeah. I also read that in the early aircraft there wasn't electric start. So what was that like, transitioning and then getting the?
But we used shotgun shells.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And so we started Corsairs for the first year and a half with shotgun shells. Now they were special shotgun shells. If you've done a lot of hunting or so on, but they're a little bigger than regular shells, and when you fire them from the cockpit, and it causes the props to start in it. And once the prop starts and it goes far enough, then it'll grab hold.
Oh, okay.
And you hold your breath there until you've flown them. So, that was the only thing we had right now that would do the starting.
Right. Right. So you talked about the Corsair and how you think it's the best aircraft of all time.
Yeah.
And you said,
No,
Oh,
I didn't
sorry,
say
I
that.
shouldn't say that.
The
You liked it.
best,
Made.
best.
Manufactured?
No,
Oh,
it's the best fighter.
fighter. Okay.
You don't want to compare them to passenger planes because they're better passenger planes.
Wouldn't you say P-51 was a pretty good fighter too?
P-51 was a wonderful fighter. I never flew one,
Okay.
but I can tell you an interesting story about it. I got a phone call from a woman in Texas. I'm trying to think of the name of the place in Texas.
Yeah.
It was close to Austin. Anyway, she says Admiral Nimitz was from Texas, and we want to enlarge his museum in the place. Would you come down and be on several panels? Oh, I said I'd love it. So my wife and I went down there and we spent a week and a half or 2 weeks, and it worked out very well. Now, the reason why this ties into it, one day they had 7 of us around a table, all pilots of different calibers. A couple were the COs, a couple were and so on. And this guy that was in charge of it, he says, now that we have 2 fighter pilots here, we're going to ask which one was the best airplane. We weren't ready for that at all. And so the guy, I remember Jim was the guy's first name. It was he was a one of these over here. Anyway, he was that, and with me. I didn't know how to answer it, but I said, if I was going to war tomorrow, I'd want to be in a Corsair. And Jim said, he says, if I was going to war, he never flown the Corsair. He said, if I was going to war tomorrow, I'd want to be in the Corsair also. I couldn't believe it. Here's a guy he had flown, flown it. So anyway, when we were off to our side, I said, Jim, you really surprised the daylights out of me. God, hear you all the time you've got in that P-51, you know, it's a good airplane. And he said, yeah, but he says, I've read everything that the Corsair has ever put out. We can't get close to it.
Mhm.
So anyway, that's the way that it was.
Yeah.
That was sort of an interesting
Yeah,
thing.
interesting.
How strong it was. How well built it was.
Right.
I can't remember his name. I have it written down at home, but I can't remember his name. You might know him if you.
Yeah, Jim, you say?
Yeah, Jim was his first name. I remember that, but I can't remember the last one, and that's the one that's important. So,
So do you have a lot of buddies over there flying? You lose anybody? Probably.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost a few, and a couple of very good pilots too. That's what war is.
Yep.
You're going to lose people that you.
Did you ever lose faith in what you guys were doing?
Nope. I think we're very good. We made some mistakes. A lot of mistakes were made in your plane and that plane, and the mistakes made. But we did the best we could in that time period.
How many hours did you have when you went overseas? When you were actually went over to fight? How many hours flying time?
Did I have at that time?
Yeah, how many hours?
Oh, you're gonna laugh at that.
Probably.
We suckers went over there. We had one guy I remember had 12 hours flying time. I was doing pretty good. I had 70 some hours. I think it was 70. Anyway, so yeah, we never had time.
We're
It
at
was
war.
from the time that we got our okay, that we were okay for combat, it was a matter of a couple days. And I went home and said hello to the folks, and that was just about the way it went. Well, I don't think there's any one way you can remember, but every guy that sacrificed something to go to war, I think they have to realize that there's a big sacrifice there. No matter what war you were in, no matter what your job was. One guy I remember was working on one of our planes one night, and I just went over and said a few things to him, and he started to cry. And he said he wanted to get into something that he could really feel good at. He didn't feel he was doing any good working on airplanes. So anyway, I told him, well, I said, you're doing a very good job here for some people like me.
Right.
So it's but anyway, go ahead.
What was the best and worst parts of it? The best and worst parts of it.
The best and worst parts of what?
The war. Your flight.
Oh.
Your flying in general.
Yeah.
Well, here's one thing you might. I told you that I had met one of the kamikaze pilots. He told me he ducked out of the job because he feigned that he had a ankle he couldn't press the bungee on. Anyway, but he was a little younger than I was. But anyway, he was now a medical doctor and apparently doing a very good job. But he loved to sing. Found that out right away. Well, I just like to sing too. I'm a lousy singer, but I still like. So he invited all his friends in that could speak English, and we put on a little show for him. He said, the very best thing that you people ever did, talking about, he could speak very good English, by the way. And he said, the best thing you ever did was drop those atomic bombs. He said, if you wouldn't have done that, he said, I wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be here, we'd all be wiped out. So it was very thoughtful. He says, you can thank your president for doing that if you want, it's from me.
Right.
But he was very sincere about that.
And that was a guy that was going to be a kamikaze pilot.
He was a kamikaze pilot. He'd been put in that group. He didn't want to be, but he he went there, and he got out of it by faking it. He had something wrong with his leg. Anyway, I think his ankle. And
was that the guy you shot his wingman down? You were in a dogfight with? Was that the guy who was flying the Nick?
oh no,
Okay.
no, that was entirely different situation.
What's that situation?
What?
That sounds like an interesting situation.
Oh, the one. Oh, what she's talking about?
Yeah.
Well, we were on a mission to hit a big aircraft factory right outside of town. The town was called, I want to say Akakura. It's not quite right. But anyway, that was, so we had this all planned, how we were going to go about it and so on. Well, anyway, as I went down first and I hit a train. I blew up a train, a whole train. Anyway, and and then the next thing, I was climbing back up and I spotted a Japanese plane, so I shot it down. So everything was really moving fast and furious. There was a nick, and I was very good on recognition, and so I recognized the plane that we called the Nick. We gave names to airplanes there because we couldn't pronounce a lot of their words. And so here I found this Nick, and he was shooting at one of our guys down below me. And so I went down, I shot him, I got him down. But anyway, so that's the way you go sometimes. You never know what's going to happen. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good.
Right.
But then you met the man, his wingman in Japan.
Oh, that's what you're talking about. Okay. Well, now that episode ties into it. Because the guy that was flying that plane that I shot down was a good friend of the doctor that I got to know. He was a kamikaze pilot, and anyway, so when I was telling him about this, he was very interested. He said, "Where did this guy get shot down?" And he was so many that, so I knew he was interested. And so finally it came out that was one of his best friends that I shot down. And but anyway, we solved that because he liked wine. He had a lot of wine stashed, so we killed several bottles of wine. The Japanese were very sincere people, and I really liked the Japanese. And boy, they didn't want to fight this war out any more than we did.
Right. So when you got home, what was the feeling like when you finally got home? When you went home?
I just felt, well, I was lucky and I got through it, and I think I've had a feeling of luck, I suppose.
Right. So what did you do after? What did you do after the war? Did you still fly?
Well, yes and no. I went right back to school. One thing I wanted to do was finish college. I had only had 1 year in, and so I went back and finished college at Iowa State. And that was good. So I finished school, and then the Marine Corps offered me a full-time job, but I did not want a full-time military job. It just wasn't geared for it. I liked the Marine Corps, but not that much. And so anyway, that's where we stood at that time.